All righty. Hello to everyone out there, and welcome to a Town Hall Roundtable, Policing, Race, and Justice in the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office, brought to you by the tiny town on the fault line, Portola Valley. I'm Mary Ann Moise Derwin, Portola Valley Vice Mayor, and I am joined here tonight by my colleague, Councilmember John Richards. Together, we are grateful that you have chosen to give up your Monday evening to be with us tonight for a robust discussion about policing in this historic time of racial reckoning and social justice unrest. 7 esteemed San Mateo County professionals with a diversity of viewpoints and a wealth of experience have generously agreed to lend us their wisdom and expertise, answer the tough questions, and help us understand and build a better road forward. What John and I have learned through our combined 25 years doing local political work in Portola Valley and the county is that all the issues, no matter how seemingly intractable, no matter how contentious, require a willingness to respect each other's viewpoint and work together to find solutions. We feel this methodology is particularly applicable tonight as we wade into choppy waters to talk about the difficult and emotional subject of policing practices in a highly charged national atmosphere. As a reference point, in Portola Valley, we don't have our own police department. We contract with the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office. For those of you who don't know the enormous jurisdictional boundaries of the Sheriff's Office, this entity is responsible for law enforcement for all of the unincorporated areas in the county, as well as for contract enforcement services for Half Moon Bay, Millbrae, San Carlos, Woodside, the Eichler Highlands in San Mateo, the Peninsula Corridor Joint Powers Board, the San Mateo County Transit District, and of course, Portola Valley. And now I will stop talking so that my colleague John Richards can start talking. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ann. So our program tonight consists of 2 parts. We have the Town Hall Roundtable discussion with our panelists and moderator, which will last about 45 minutes. And then we go to a Q&A period with the audience and the panelists. We will wrap up at about 8:30. You can submit questions live through the Q&A portal. And we're fortunate to have Betsy Colby from the League of Women Voters from San Mateo County here tonight to impartially review and sort the questions before forwarding them on to the moderator. In addition to the questions we received tonight, questions were also received in advance, and we'll try to get to as many of these questions as possible with the time available to us. I know this is a very popular event. We've already got a lot of people on board here, which is great. So without further ado, let me now introduce Henrietta Burroughs, our moderator. Henrietta is an award-winning journalist. She's the founder of the East Palo Alto Center for Community Media, a nonprofit established in 2003 to fill that city's information void. In 2006, the center launched East Palo Alto Today, the first continuously published East Palo Alto newspaper in 20 years. Beginning her career in New York City as a newspaper reporter, Henrietta went on to become a television news reporter and news show host. While working for Newsweek, she produced syndicated stories that aired nationally. In San Jose, she worked as editorial director of KNTV, where she won an Emmy from the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, a golden medallion from the State Bar of California for distinguished reporting, and an Excellence in the Media Award from the San Jose community. In addition, her writings have appeared in the New York Post, New York Times, Black Enterprise, the San Jose Business Journal, and a host of other publications. And stories from her bi-weekly talk show at EPA's Center for Community Media, Talking with Henrietta, have received awards from many media organizations. Henrietta received a BA in philosophy from Howard University, an MA in International Affairs from the School of International Public Affairs at Columbia University, and a certificate in broadcast journalism from the Graduate School. And with that, Henrietta, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, John. I would like to thank the town of Portola Valley and commend everybody for being a part of our discussion this evening. I'd like also to begin the introductions. I'll start with Sheriff Carlos Bolanos, who has more than 40 years of law enforcement experience in Northern California. In 2016, he was appointed San Mateo County Sheriff and elected as sheriff by the people in 2018. Prior to that, he served as San Mateo County Undersheriff. He has a BA from the University of San Francisco and an MPA from California State University, East Bay. District Attorney Stephen Wagstaff is a lifelong San Mateo County resident who was hired as Deputy District Attorney in 1977. And he has been with the San Mateo County DA's office since that time. In 2010, he was elected San Mateo County District Attorney, and he has been re-elected twice. Steve has a BA from the University of Notre Dame and a JD from the University of California Hastings College of Law. Captain Christina Corpus is currently commander of Headquarters Patrol in the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office, where she oversees law enforcement in Emerald Hills, North Fair Oaks, unincorporated Menlo Park, Portola Valley, and Woodside. She has worked for San Mateo County for 25 years and 18 years for the Sheriff's Office. Christina has a BA from Union Institute and University, which is in Ohio, an MA from the University of San Diego Law, and she is currently working on her MS in Law Enforcement and Safety Leadership at the University of San Diego. Kevin Allen is a criminal justice attorney on the San Mateo County Defenders Panel. He also maintains a private criminal law practice in Belmont. He was previously a deputy public defender in the San Francisco Public Defender's Office and director of the San Francisco Department of Police Accountability. Kevin has a BA from the University of California at Santa Barbara and a JD from Golden Gate University School of Law. Reverend Lori Carter Owens is the president of the NAACP San Mateo branch. She is also assistant pastor at His Gospel Christian Fellowship in Oakland, and she works as an education technology professional in San Mateo County. She did her undergraduate studies at California State University, East Bay, attended Trinity College of the Bible and Trinity Theological Seminary, and did graduate studies in organizational development and human resources at the University of San Francisco. Michael Smith is a planning commissioner and candidate for the city council in Redwood City. He is also an entrepreneur, a strategic business advisor, and an adjunct professor at Kenyatta College. He found his way to the San Francisco Bay Area in 2016 by way of both Bridgeport and New Haven, Connecticut, Seoul, South Korea, and Harlem, New York. Michael has a BA from Yale University and an MBA from New York University. I'd like to start our questioning this evening with a question for all of our panelists. Given the protests that have taken place in this country and throughout the world this year, what steps do you think need to be taken to resolve some of the issues we've seen between communities of color and law enforcement? Should I call on someone, or would someone like to volunteer to start?
I'll go ahead.
Thank you.
I know that the rest of them will warm up soon. Wow, unprecedented times this year. You know, we started off dealing with COVID. We had the fires in our area, and then we had the tragic and unfortunate event involving Mr. George Floyd in Minneapolis, which has truly brought the focus on the relationship between law enforcement and our communities of color. It is, I think, important to note that that relationship is different throughout the country. The relationship that we have in San Mateo County is different than the relationship that other organizations have with the communities that they serve. At the sheriff's office, we have a culture of recognizing that we are here to serve our communities irrespective of their race or their ethnicity. And we work tirelessly to build those relationships, with the people that we serve. It has really brought focus on the need for us to, really take stock of the relationships that we have with our communities of color. And I truly commend the Portola Valley Town Council, and I thank Marianne and John for inviting me today to talk about this issue. I know we're going to get into it a lot more in depth, so I'll stop there and let you hear from another.
Well, before you stop, Sheriff Bolanos, would you share one or two steps that you think need to be taken by your department?
Sure. I think I have a very diverse organization, which is difficult in San Mateo County because San Mateo County is and many of the communities in the county are not anywhere near as diverse as they could be. And I think that when you have an organization that is diverse as mine is, I think it makes all people of color feel more comfortable when they are relating to someone that looks like them.
So are you saying the sheriff's department needs to have more enforcement officers who reflect the community? Is that
I think we need to have
you're thinking
more,
of taking?
Yes, more personnel. I think we already reflect the community, but Henrietta, reflecting the community means a different thing in every community. And
Okay, thank you. So let's go on. Any other volunteers?
Hi, it's Captain Christina Corpus. So I'd just like to echo what Sheriff Bolanos mentioned in regards to reflecting the communities that we serve. As a woman of color myself, I got into law enforcement because I wanted to represent the little girls that look like me. And I've been able to do that, with heart, and I've just seeing what's happened in other parts of the country, to communities of color, have really taken a toll on all law enforcement and throughout the country and everyone. So working harder and listening, being active listeners and working together is really important. Also, we strive to hire more women too in law enforcement. And so we do things like women's boot camps, and we have been, since COVID has taken place, we can do things virtually, but it's not that in-person relationship that we've normally had in the past. So I do want to say that, yeah, we can continue to look for people that understand our communities. Just because somebody speaks Spanish doesn't, it's not, they may not understand the culture. So it's really important to have that other aspect of understanding the culture as well.
Thank you, Captain Corpus. Reverend Owens.
Thank you. And I want to express my appreciation to Portola Valley for hosting this town hall and for inviting me. And I just wanted to say that I agree with Sheriff Bolanos and Captain Corpus that having a diverse workforce in law enforcement is definitely a good first step, and continuing to expand that representation is important. And I can see where that would be difficult in San Mateo County, given the numbers of people of color or the percentages in many parts of the county. But that said, I think that one of the first steps that law enforcement across the county, in some cases has done, some haven't, but in all cases needs to either do or improve, is reaching out to the community and first acknowledging there is a problem. There is a problem between with law enforcement and people of color. Now, it may not be, some people may say that it is not an actual, it's in your head, but the truth of the matter is statistic after statistic shows that when we have arrests, when we have instances of use of force, it tends to be more people of color who are affected than people who are not of color. I can say that just as a African-American person, and I've worked in San Mateo County for many, many, many years. And nowadays I don't have any issue. And this doesn't have anything to do with the Sheriff's Department. I won't mention what law enforcement agency it was. But when I was in my 20s, I worked graveyard at a location in San Mateo County. And I used to go to a location, I won't give the name of it because I'll give away the city, but it was open all night because I worked graveyard and I was in college, and I many times didn't have lunch with me, and I would go there. And I worked with Caucasian males. I was the only female on that shift. I was the only person of color on that shift. And without question, I would get pulled over. It's like 3 in the morning. I would get pulled over. They never put the siren on so they wouldn't wake anybody up, but they put the light on, pulled me over. I was driving an RX-7, so it wasn't, car falling apart, and asked, "What are you doing here?" Never asked, told what I was doing wrong. I never got a ticket. Never got told what I was doing wrong. It was always, "What are you doing here?" And when I used to ask my Caucasian coworkers, they never got pulled over. So
Reverend Owens, thank you so much for sharing. Maybe we can get back to that as we continue our discussion. District Attorney Wagstaff. Mr. Wagstaff, what steps do you think need to be taken to improve the relationship between communities of color and law enforcement?
Thank you, and thank you again to Portola Valley for letting us participate. Henrietta, I'd offer 2 suggestions from my perspective as the county prosecutor. Number one, what everybody else said, which is we need to get more diversity in all of our positions. In the district attorney's office, we're obviously an organization of people who hold a great deal of power in San Mateo County. And I very much want to continue efforts to diversify. We've made some, but there's nothing, it's nowhere near what it needs to be so that the members of our community, both victims are the people we've accused of crimes and everybody else, will sit there and realize, you know what, I can identify with this prosecutor's office. They don't need to see a bunch of people who look like me. The second avenue I would mention is communication. This is something we haven't been good at in my office, in my view. It's something we're trying to change. And I'm thinking of Reverend Owens, it's, hearing you again, as I did before. And I remember the last time I had a plan. I wanted to ask Reverend Owens to come talk to my prosecutors, to talk to my investigators, to give a perspective. And you know what? You get crushed in the business and you don't do it. And I think that's part of what we need to do, Henrietta, is reach out, bring into our office the people who can tell us stories like Reverend Owens just told us, to educate us, to make us aware of what it is. And so that to me would be 2 big steps in terms of communication that will help the community develop some faith that their people in position of authority, like the district attorney, the sheriff, will give them fairness and equity out there when they're living their life, whether it be at 3 in the morning or 3 in the afternoon.
Thank you. Kevin Allen, do you think those 2 big steps are a good start? Are they enough?
All right, well, thank you again, Portola Valley, for having us. And I just want to say, from the gate, I think everybody expects us to be super contentious. And I absolutely respect law enforcement. I respect our district attorney's office. So I'd like to start, with saying that. But like the sheepdog and the wolf, in the wolf in those cartoons, we have to have our issues. So I've heard what everybody said, and I appreciate what Steve is saying. I wrote down, crushed in the business. We get caught up in the business and we don't address these issues. But really, the reality is we don't need a Reverend Lori Owens to come in and tell us about what's going on. These are known facts. These are issues that are going on out there. And I appreciate Steve he works towards building diversity in the office. But these are conversations that you can have. Steve has I know the grand jury just wrote a report and they talked about trainings. Well, make these part of mandatory trainings. They have videos that can be pulled up online that will talk about implicit bias and community policing. They can incorporate that, and Steve and everyone else, the sheriff, all these are out there. They're tools that are there for us to use to better our organizations. You know, it's hard because we talk about Sheriff Bolanos and the sheriff, but we have a lot of police organizations. And one of the issues here is they're independent organizations. Different cities have different police. So while the sheriff has wide-ranging jurisdiction, Daly City has their own police department, South City has the police department. And I think uniformity is very important because one department may act differently than another. So it's gonna be a combination of getting all of these agencies together with the communities and working on a collaborative way to change how law enforcement is done. Not say that law enforcement is bad, but can there be changes? Can there be improvements? Of course, but it takes people sitting down at the table together, not waiting for the opportunity and the time, but making the opportunity and the time.
Michael Smith, you have had the benefit of hearing everybody else's responses. Is that helpful to you in terms of the steps you think need to be taken?
Well, I'd like to add something that's a bit additive, but I do want to say thank you to Marianne and John for hosting this really great conversation. I think this is the first opportunity that I've been asked to have all of these different stakeholders from the San Mateo County community in one place to have this really important conversation. And you mentioned one thing when you were introducing me, and it was about my experience living abroad, including in Seoul, South Korea. And the reason I'm bringing that up is that I really think that the US law enforcement apparatus needs to take a more comparative approach in developing policy from an HR perspective, from a budgeting perspective, and from an operations perspective. And the reason I'm bringing up Seoul is that the relationship that Koreans have with the police is completely, I'd never seen anything like it. I lived in Seoul for 2 years, and the relationship was, I would call it productive. It was one of trust, and it was one of mutual support. That is the kind of dynamic and the kind of culture that we need to be actively trying to create in our communities, across communities, including our communities of color. So I think that, yes, it's about representative policing and representative enforcement of kind of our execution of our DA function, but it's also about just making sure that we are focusing on the communities that feel like they have been heard, so that trust and mutual support can be built. It's about collaboration, as Kevin mentioned, but again, I think it's about taking best practices from areas, from countries, from cities that are doing a really great job in implementing those things. We can't exist in silos. Those silos are what's causing these issues in many respects. We need to be thinking holistically about this problem so that we can move on and start to really work together as a community.
So Michael has mentioned trust, mutual support, and collaboration. And I'm wondering, as we look at your independent organizations, have you made any changes in your work in the community that may have brought about some of those initiatives since the murder of George Floyd and the racial justice protests we've had?
Shall I go
Hello,
for it?
everyone.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Kim.
Sheriff Bolanos.
Okay, thank you very much.
And then Kevin Allen, how's that?
You know, we had a tragic incident in Millbrae sometime back, which resulted in the use of a taser in which a man lost his life. And as a result of that incident, we really looked within our organization to determine what are things that we could do better. I firmly believe that even when we may not have done everything right or wrong, there is always an opportunity for us to learn. And as a result of that incident, we had the opportunity with the input of the ACLU to develop a new use of force policy. We put AEDs, automated external defibrillators, in all of our vehicles. We added some additional less lethal weaponry. There are many people who say, no tasers, no less lethal. And for law enforcement personnel, that puts our community at risk because we go from having tools that we can use as intermediate steps to hopefully never having to, but using, deadly force. And I think Kevin was the one that mentioned implicit bias training. I brought in implicit bias training for every member of my organization to ensure that we could address those issues that exist in our society today in all institutions, including law enforcement. And
Sheriff Bolanos, thank you. Now, Kevin, I'm sure since you wanted to react initially, you have a reaction to what Sheriff Bolanos said.
Oh, I do, and I appreciate what the sheriff said. I was just going to say, you asked what steps have been implemented. So first and foremost, it's our office. We have been doing trainings even prior to this. One of the things we do is we'll have movies, and we have a movie night where all the lawyers go to various movies. We watch legal films, and the last one we watched was 13. It was the Netflix show about the 13th Amendment and crime, the prison system here in our society. And so we were doing that and inviting not only the lawyers, but other individuals to come and see these films so that we could talk about them afterwards and remind ourselves the job that we're doing. Since the George Floyd, there was a protest that was led, and it was led by the public defender office, or the private defender office, public defenders across the state did it. We participated in that, and then we've continued to work towards hopefully working with the law enforcement agencies to recognize, as the sheriff mentioned, use of force, lethal, less lethal things such as tasers and the bullets, the rubber bullets. We have been working on building a database of information, and hopefully we can get all the agencies to join in and give us information so that we can build a database and help track, and not to necessarily go after police, but to work, as Michael mentioned, to work with the various stakeholders so that we can show, hey, we recognize patterns, and before these patterns get out of control, let's see if we can't work to correct this. So we want to be proactive as opposed to reactive. Thank you.
Mr. Wagstaff, has your office taken any specific steps over the past few months?
Yes, what we've done is over the last 4 months, I've created 2 committees to exist. I've asked, one of them is a racial equity committee, and the other is a social equity committee. I've told them I want them to study, read everything possible to deal with. One of those, the racial equity committee, is how we interact with the community. The social equity is how we utilize our power. 2 different committees, 2 different groups. I've asked them to study it, prepare documents for me, and then come back and tell us, what can we do? What can I do as a district attorney in these 2 arenas to try and react and do our job more fairly and with better justice to meet every component of our community? That's my goal. They're working on it here. I have people of diversity heading up those committees to make sure that we have the right perspective. But I want the committees are very diverse in themselves because to try and match my office. That's our goal right now. Those are 2 steps that I have taken in that line.
Sure, thanks. Captain Corpus, you emphasize diversity. Are there other steps that you think should be taken or that you have taken?
Yes, so I have an opportunity to really spearhead our community policing. And what we have done is we train all of our deputies to be community policing officers, deputies. It shouldn't just be a specialized unit because everyone represents the sheriff's office when they're out in the communities. And we really work hard at building those relationships, building the trust, forging those relationships and nurturing those relationships.
If I could ask you, what does community policing involve?
It involves going out in the community, talking to people, getting to know who's in the community. You know, we emphasize treat people as if that was your family member that you would want to be treated. We emphasize treating everyone equally, not based on where they live or the kind of profession that they have. You know, we never know what person has walked, what life has given them, be it good or bad. And, you know, having empathy when you're out there and talking to people, because we can't judge people based upon what they look like or what we think that, you know, they may have. And, you know, that implicit bias training really opened people's eyes. So I appreciate that training and continue moving forward. But really, community policing is, I mean, we do a lot, and I can go more in depth with that, but really working at those relationships, because it's important for people to know us, and it's important for us to know the community, because when we're in those communities working, that is our community. We have to take ownership, and we have to take ownership for, because we are there to protect people's lives and, you know, to safeguard the community members.
Thank you. Now, Reverend Owens and Michael, the two of you have heard about some of the steps that have already been taken. Have you seen any changes over the past few months as you've gone about your activities? Have you been stopped again, Reverend Owens?
Well, I haven't been stopped for something that I didn't do. If I get stopped, it's because I did it now. But my point is that as a young person, that happened quite frequently, and that was me as a female. And I would say, in terms of, have I personally seen anything like what I did when I was a young person? No, I'm a middle-aged woman, and not, I don't fit profiles like a young African-American male would. But I'll be honest, I'm scared every time my young grandsons, ages 25 and 18, go out, because they do fit the profile. But have I seen any difference from the standpoint of what I've seen directly from the sheriff's office? No, I did not know about I did know about some of the upgrades to the, or changes to the use of force. But in terms of any direct contact with the sheriff's office, no, haven't had that approach from the sheriff's office, from our organization. We have had extensive interaction with the San Mateo Police Department, and we've had that a very good relationship with them beforehand, and we have had even more interaction with them. So one of our goals, even though we're a small branch, is to try to have that same type of relationship with all of the police departments and law enforcement organizations in San Mateo County, because that for us is where the dialogue and the improvement would start.
So Michael, have you seen any changes over the past few months when it comes to the police and the community?
Yeah, I have, and I've actually been very heartened by the speed as well as the intention that many of our law enforcement organizations have been approaching this problem. Of course, it may take longer for other organizations, but here in Redwood City specifically, there's been a lot of excellent work that has gone on in the last 5 months since the brutal killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor at the hands of law enforcement. The Black Lives Matter protesters, which I helped to support in the protests that happened on Courthouse Square, created a wonderful memo and sent it to our city leadership, including city council, as well as the city manager and the chief of police. And as a result, we had a series of 7 community listening sessions that were sponsored by, that were put on by the Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center. From there, we had a number of wonderful insights from our community about the nature of policing in Redwood City. Some of it was hard to hear, I have to be honest with you. I was personally in a session where there was a homeless man, a formerly homeless man, who said he had been beaten up almost on a daily basis at the hands of the police. But these are the types of insights that we needed to hear. We really needed to understand what was happening from a communal perspective here in Redwood City. And as a result of this intense listening, the City Council and the city management staff has put together a comprehensive list of reforms. They're good. I think they could be even more aggressive in helping us to avoid a tragedy that we saw in Minneapolis and Louisville. But I think we're on the right path. I think we're on a path to avoid having a situation like that happen here. And we just have to keep pushing the dialogue forward. I'm hoping that the sheriff's office will, continue to have these conversations and reach out to folks like Reverend Owens and myself and Kevin Allen, so that these conversations will create change in a real way across San Mateo County.
Thank you. Now, Sheriff Bolanos mentioned an incident when a San Mateo County resident was killed from the overuse of a taser. And I'm just wondering what has been learned from the high-profile deadly taser incidents over the past few years that have involved the sheriff office deputies' responses to mental health crises.
Thank you, Henrietta. So first of all, I want to say that I don't believe that the medical conclusion was that the taser killed that individual, and tragic, certainly as tragic as it was. That case is currently under litigation, so I really can't talk specifics, but I do want to clarify that the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office had one incident. That was it. There were 2 other incidents in the county at the same time with other law enforcement agencies and the use of the taser. And what the Sheriff's Office did was we upgraded all of our tasers. As I mentioned, we put AEDs in all the vehicles. We conducted the implicit bias training. We doubled up on our psychological emergency response team, which is a team which is composed of a deputy and a behavioral clinician who goes out and deals with many of these situations which sadly involve persons suffering from mental illness. So,
any other comments that any of you might have?
Yes, I have one. Although I know that the case is under litigation involving Mr. Chinedu Okobi, and there may not be an official decision that the taser contributed directly to his death. And then this is just my opinion, maybe I'm wrong, but I do believe had he not been pursued that afternoon, he had broken no law that I'm aware of except maybe jaywalking. If he had not been pursued by the Sheriff's Department, he more than likely would still be alive. Could be wrong, maybe not. I do want to acknowledge the Sheriff's Department's adoption of, I believe, 6 of the 8 can-wait use of force mandates in their policy. And so I don't want that to go unnoticed. It is definitely something that I and our branch appreciates. But the fact is still that we are adamantly, we're one of those people, Sheriff, that are one group of those people who do not believe in the use of tasers. There was in the study session that the Board of Supervisors did, there was information that was given by Dr. Sang and Julie Tron that talked about some considerations regarding tasers. And Ms. Tron in particular, she's from the Bar Association of San Francisco, talked about the fact that there was actually increased shootings, increased incidents to vulnerable people, and low efficacy. About 50 to 53% efficacy in the use of the tasers, yet the Sheriff's Department has spent almost $1 million more on these devices. So I think that, and the community has come out, and a number of people in the community came out against it. It went forward anyway, but there's been no outreach from the Sheriff's Department to try to engage organizations like mine who fact that we don't believe in the use of tasers. We know San Francisco doesn't use them, and understanding why it was so important in these dire budget times to spend $1 million more on tasers. So that would be my response, and we still remain troubled by that. Although again, we want to acknowledge the strides and the improvements in the use of force policy by the Sheriff's Department.
Well, thank you. I find your comments refreshing. I agree with most of them, not all of them, but most of them. I agree that the taser certainly is a contributing factor in some of these tragic situations. But I find it to be a valuable tool that gives my people one additional tool to use before we have to resort to deadly force. For example, we also bought the 40 millimeter launchers, which shoot a rubber bullet, and put those in all of our patrol vehicles, not because of something that happened in the sheriff's office jurisdiction, but because of something that happened in a neighboring jurisdiction where they used a taser. Taser was ineffective. The person had a weapon, advanced on the officers, and at that point they had no other option except to use deadly force. And so I feel that the more tools we have, in fact, we're using we just started a tool which many people find humorous, which is called a bowler wrap. It's like a lasso, works on incapacitating an individual and bringing them down. Anything that we can do to avoid violence, we want to do. It is not a pleasant thing to do, and it is truly the last step we want to take in the apprehension of any individual.
I have a follow-up question. Just this week, we had a report how a police officer was fired because he was a part of a white supremacist group. And we've heard reports that some police departments, law enforcement departments have been infiltrated by white supremacists. Any comments on that? We've talked about the training, but what about tests that would weed out law enforcement officials who already have very knowable biases?
Sure. So, as mentioned, I've been doing this for over 40 years, and I've worked with a lot of different individuals. I have yet to work with somebody who I would say is a white supremacist. Now, obviously, I'm not white, so maybe that person or those persons managed to avoid me the whole time. But I think it's important to know, I'm not saying that that's not true, but I do think it's important to make a distinction between law enforcement throughout the country, which is very different, and the law enforcement that we have here in San Mateo County. Our San Mateo County law enforcement, they're all professionals. We will make mistakes. We will try to learn from them. But I just think that what happened, we talk about implicit bias. George Floyd happened in Minneapolis, and all of a sudden, everybody assumes that every law enforcement officer is racist, and it's just not true.
Comments from anyone else?
Yeah, I have a comment. This is Michael. So I think that my response to that is that we need our law enforcement professionals to hold themselves and their colleagues accountable. It is about accountability ultimately. And by no means, I believe anyone on this call would say that the vast majority of law enforcement are racist. However, we do understand that there are potentially racist tendencies that exist among certain law enforcement professionals. And it is about bringing that standard of professionalism up to a level where when there are things that are being seen, things that are being heard that point to an aspect of bias or even potentially racism, that it is called out immediately to superior officers within that organization so that we can begin the rooting out process in an active way, in a proactive way, rather than reactive after something has happened.
I would have to agree with Mr. Smith that I'm not as concerned about blatant white supremacists in law enforcement in San Mateo County. I mean, there may be some, but I know from my vantage point, that's not what we're hearing about per se. But again, I agree with Mr. Smith that it may not be the blatant, white supremacist type of racism, but it is that implicit, that under, that covert, why am I pulling this person over as opposed to that person? The finding, your tail light is off, and now all of a sudden we've got a full-on search. And why does that seem to happen more with people of color than it does with whites? So I think that the implicit bias training is important. I hope it's not a one and done. It's not one of those things where you bring somebody in and say, hey, search yourself, and you have like a kumbaya moment and then it's all over. This is something that has to be ongoing, because all of us, and that would include officers of color, all of us have biases. And I went to a training one time with Black administrators, and we sat there and got flash pictures and asked the question of the picture of the white boy and the picture of the Black boy, which one do you think have the gun? And we were Black, and we all had more of an instance of saying it was the Black young man that we thought had the gun in the picture, and it was actually the opposite. So we need to continue to deal with that bias. We need to look at the numbers. The numbers don't lie. More people of color get pulled over.
Bias, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm done.
Bias in your department, Mr. Wagstaff? Implicit bias of any type?
Is there? Absolutely. Absolutely. You try to do it. We've done, as Reverend Owens noted, you can't make it one and done. The one I'm doing in November for my staff will be the third one in 4 years. Still not enough. I agree, having a professor come in, but clearly it's in ours. And that's part of the trouble I had 3 years ago, is people were actually a little insulted that I would actually suggest that we have bias. But yes, Henrietta, it's only a fool who denies that they have their biases. Everybody has their biases. The key is becoming aware of them and overcoming them.
And that's something that's taking place in your department?
It is. It is. In November, I'm bringing up a professor from UCLA who's gone all over the country lecturing. We're not bringing him up, he'll be on Zoom, but lecturing all over the country to law enforcement agencies about dealing with bias, both explicit and implicit. And I'm going to have, he will be speaking to my entire staff.
Well, President Trump just came out to say that he thinks that type of training is an insult to, let's say, in the Department of Justice.
I first heard the idea to do this a number of years ago when I heard the African-American U.S. attorney for Cleveland talk about what he had done within his own department. I said, that's great. That's the way you begin to get at things. And I learned from that. So for anybody to suggest that it's an insult, they're living in a bygone era.
Well, talking about
Henry, I'm sorry, can I?
Yes,
I just
please.
going to, and I know I'm looking at time, and I know we're running short, and there's so much in this question that I'd like to address. I appreciate, Reverend Owens and Mr. Smith. The implicit bias obviously is an issue, and I know that Sheriff Bolanos and Steve Wagstaff would not encourage or condone any discriminations within their department. But here's one of the problems, and I have a police officer cousin who's Black, he's like me, and he mentioned one of the things is there's a culture, and it's not that people are necessarily racist. And when we talk about cultures and institutionalized racism, their hackles go up in the back of their neck. It's an insult. People don't want to say we are racist or we have racism, but there is a culture, and unfortunately, it's a tough job to be a police officer. I get that. When you put out a call, you expect response from your other folks that are working with you. Well, here's the deal. If somebody is texting somebody else and making a gay joke or a joke against women, and we're asking people to come forward, there need to be protections for those people. Because within the department, if somebody doesn't feel comfortable to say, hey, my supervising officer, I saw this. If that person is going to put out a call later and maybe suffer some consequences because others are going to think, you know what, you don't cross that line. That's one of the areas I think that we need to address is the people that are brave enough to say something need to know that they will be protected when they say something. If they're not going to speak. So you have 5 bad apples in a department of 200, 180 of them are going to be complicit in what's going on simply so that they can get along and go home to their people. And I understand that. But until we attack that head on, there's implicit bias, but there are just the outrights that we need to attack. And one of the things, and I'm going to shut it off after this, we have people that move from department to department. Somebody gets fired in I'm going to say Missouri, outside of our county. We don't really know what goes on. We do background checks, and I'm sure they do great checks, but then they're hired somewhere else, and we find out they were a really bad apple somewhere, and nobody necessarily knew it coming into this other department. There need to be all of these checks and balances in place, and we need to start attacking this issue now.
Before we move on, any burning comments on what you just heard? No burning comments. The Crisis Act pilot program, AB 2054, would have scaled up community-based alternatives to replace some police duties, but was vetoed by Governor Newsom. So what direction do all of you think the sheriff's office should take with regard to the possible shifting of responsibilities for calls such as mental health crises to other agencies? Part of some of the reimagining that we've heard about. Is this a good idea?
Well, I'll start since you asked what the sheriff's office should do. And let me tell you what we've done. As I said, many years ago, my predecessor, Sheriff Monks, started the psychological emergency response team. Take one deputy, you pair them with one clinician, and they follow up on every single mental health call for service to try to get folks out of the system, out of the criminal justice system, to ensure that they get the help that they need. We have doubled up with that program, as I mentioned earlier, to where we now have 2 teams. It is not like the Cahoots program, which one of our questioners asked about, where they're out in the field waiting for that call for service, because we don't feel we have the volume to do that. But I think the system we have is the best one. I know your question's a little different, which is, reimagining, which is the new word for what was called defunding. And it's not because I want to lose funding or not. I want to keep people safe. And I think that if we take money away from law enforcement and have other people do aspects of this job, which are so dangerous, I'll just tell you, I wouldn't want my children responding to domestic violence calls, mental illness calls, many of which unfortunately wind up, becoming violent because of the nature of the illness that the person is suffering from, or the type of call that it is. And Berkeley, we all heard, they went away from having officers do car stops, and they're going to have civilians do that. You couldn't pay me enough to do that job, and I guarantee you that the number of traffic citations that they write are going to go way down.
Any other comments before we take audience questions? Yes, Reverend Owens.
I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. I do believe that there are tasks that law enforcement have been asked to take on, particularly here in California after the mental health system that we had in place at one time was dismantled. I'll get into the politics of that. So I do recognize that there are things that our police are asked to do, our sheriff deputies are asked to do that they shouldn't. And I do believe that to the degree that some, and I'm not talking about defunding, I'm not a defunding advocate per se, but I do think that there should be some tasks taken away from law enforcement that makes sense. I agree with Sheriff Bolanos. I know there's some things we disagree with, but I agree with him from the standpoint of if I'm being attacked by somebody, even if that person is undergoing a mental incident, I'm not sure if that person's coming after me with a knife that I want a social worker first on the scene. I'm just being honest. Even though I don't want that person to die if there's no, I want that to be dealt with in a way that is safe for everybody. So it's kind of a two-headed answer from the standpoint of, yes, there are some things that should be taken away from law enforcement. We need to look at those things. But I think rather than just do this butcher knife cut of funds and cut of budgets and all of that, it needs to be a little bit more strategic, but it does need to be done.
Sure. Now, one member of the audience asked, what kind of oversight is there on facial recognition services, such as Clearview, used by San Mateo County Sheriff's Office in the past for policing, either within the office or by the town of Portola Valley?
Henrietta, can I just jump in about the last question just really quick?
Sure.
I just want to do less than a minute. I truly think that the veto of AB 2054 was a miss on the part of Governor Newsom. I have generally supported Governor Newsom in most of his policy decision-making, but I do believe it was a miss. And the comments that he made in reference to this veto were very tight-lipped. There was not a lot of information or explanation as to why it was vetoed. But I think that this creates an opportunity, especially for those of us who are attending this meeting. Make sure you're looking at the folks who you're electing and their track record in policing, and specifically the reimagining of policing. It is critical. If we are serious about this issue, we need to make this an issue that we see on the ballot, and not just in terms of different bills, but in terms of candidates, in terms of budgets, and all of that.
Well, I don't want to stop anyone else who might want to comment.
Well, then I'll comment again. I agree with the Reverend Owens in regards to, every possible duty has been placed on the back of our law enforcement officers. You name it. I mean, when we're out there responding to call for service, you name it, we are responsible for it. We're the first ones that people call. We do our best. Are we the best at everything? Maybe not. And I will challenge my respected fellow panelist, Michael, to, I'm very interested in hearing what it is that he feels we can, reimagine. I rarely agree with the governor, but I did agree with him on this. And we can move to questions and answers now.
Yes, now that question.
I'm sorry, just wanted to very quick follow up, and I appreciate both comments. The sheriff is right. I mentioned earlier, policing is very difficult, and they do take on a lot of tasks when they go out. And the Reverend is correct. If you have somebody with a gun and they're a little out of control, you don't want just a social worker going. But I think there's a bigger, and it's not going to be something that's solved overnight and maybe with one bill, but with our agency, and our agency, I have to give kudos. Lisa McGuire just took over. She is amazing, and she is working hard to help us deal with some of these issues. We're looking at hiring a social worker to come on staff to work with people as they come through. Now, I don't know how that would be translated to the police, but people mentioned the gentleman in Millbrae. Maybe if somebody were there to talk him down, as the Reverend mentioned, maybe there wouldn't have been a taser necessary. It's a tough call, but these are why these conversations need to happen. And Sheriff Bolanos has mentioned a lot of wonderful programs I wasn't necessarily aware of. I'm wondering if there's going to be a time when all the stakeholders come together and speak. Like, he might talk to Lisa and say, hey, we're talking about doing this. Can we talk to your attorneys that are defending the 148s, the resisting arrests that are potentially questionable? And Steve's folks would be there. We all need to come together at these tables and have these conversations. Sorry.
So, before I get back to that question about artificial intelligence, since we're talking about complaints aimed towards law enforcement, what about the complaints by law enforcement officials that Prop 57 has caused more crime by making it harder to prosecute criminals? What do you think about the effect of Prop 57 that made some charges misdemeanors?
So
They're still prosecuted. Sorry, and I love Steve in his office.
That
but
would have been
still-
felonies.
they're still prosecuted. They're just prosecuted on a lower level. I mean, obviously, yes, we don't get the big crimes that are coming in, but I think in this COVID era, excuse me, we've only had 5 or 6 trials go out since March, and 3 or 4 of them have been misdemeanor trials. So they are moving along, and the trials are happening. And you know, to Steve's point, to his credit, they represent the people, so they're going to bring the charges. But we're going to make sure that we're there to defend those and make sure that everything is done fairly, just as the police are going to arrest. But we have to look at all the facts. Black folks are 8 times more likely to be arrested in San Mateo County. That's just a fact. Why? We need to get to the bottom of that. But if they're arrested, 8 times more likely, Steve's going to prosecute those. That's going to put 8 times more Black folks in. And when you look at our jails with the populations, it's a disproportionate amount of folks. There's Latinos and Blacks filling up our jails, which also goes to the bail initiative. And there's so much information. I'm trying to talk way too fast, so I'm going to pass.
Any other comments on that before we move on? Mr. Wagstaff, I saw you shaking your head affirmatively.
I am, because I do very much agree with what Kevin is saying. We need to come together, but and it is, we take the cases that are brought to us. We don't pick the cases and say, reject half, keep half. We take what's brought to us. I think a big thing in terms of incarceration of people of color is on the ballot right now. I am a very big supporter of ending money bail, because I think it does favor on an economic level the people with money. And I think that I hope that initiative there in 2.5 weeks will pass, and we will have no more money bail, and courts can just make decisions on people's reliability of appearing in court and danger to the community. Because I think that's led to a great deal of what Kevin's talking about. People of color being incarcerated, while people who might be Caucasian, they're posting the bail. We have, $1 million, 500,000 all the time, that people of color in certain communities are not able to do. So my big thing is that's an avenue that would be a good step in equalizing our community.
Sure, I'd like to get back to that question about artificial intelligence, to ask what kind of oversight is there on facial recognition services such as Clearview Artificial Intelligence used by the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office in the past for policing, either within the office or by the town of Portola Valley?
So I don't have the answer to that question. I know that we do use facial recognition technology, but let me ask Captain Corpus if perhaps she may know something about that.
Sheriff, yes, so we are audited, and our detective bureau our specialized units will use those in high priority cases where it's been a violent crime. We wouldn't use it, say if somebody stole a bicycle, it'd have to be a really violent crime for them to use that technology. And we are audited and do have oversight as well. So, and our specialized units are the ones that use that that technology.
The last I read, that technology made a lot of mistakes when it was trying to identify the faces of residents of color. So are you aware of that, and is anything being done to resolve that issue?
I'd like to chime in with that if I could, because I know exactly what you're referring to, Henrietta. We will, being the district attorney's office, we will not base any case where recognition is an element or needed to prove the case. We will not introduce it. It's not admissible in court, and we will not allow a search warrant or an arrest warrant to in any fashion be based. We will not include that in a search warrant or arrest warrant for the reason you mentioned. It is not yet at a scientific level where it can be viewed as acceptable in our court system or arrest. It may be a tool that law enforcement uses. It's like the lie detector, the polygraph. That's still not admissible in a court of law because of its lack of reliability. They use it as an investigative tool, but it is not something that we will use in the court system.
Sure. The question has come in whether the San Mateo County Sheriff's Department cooperates with Immigration and Customs enforcement? And if so, how can this type of cooperation be limited, or should it be limited?
Well, thank you. That's a very good question. All of the law enforcement agencies in San Mateo County, including the Sheriff's Office, never introduce someone's citizenship as an issue in the enforcement of our laws or in any contacts. The only time that we do cooperate with ICE is in the jails, and we do that pursuant to Senate Bill 54, the California Values Act, also called the California Sanctuary Law, which states that the only people that we can cooperate with ICE on are people who have committed serious and violent felonies. And in that case, we do cooperate with ICE, but it's only in the jails.
So there was a story that I read that ICE officials were allowed into jails, and when, let's say, someone was released, they could pick them up right away because they got the information from the system. Has any of that been changed?
Yes, it doesn't. It doesn't. We're not allowed to do that as part of Senate Bill 54. The only people that we're allowed to cooperate with ICE on are, again, the serious and violent felons. The people that if they are released, they will go back and prey on the same communities that they came from. So I think we're just looking at some numbers today, and I'll just tell you, it's not a very large number at all on an annual basis. But those are the only people that we can legally cooperate with ICE, and we do.
Any other comments?
So Henrietta, just real brief, and Sheriff, I appreciate what you just mentioned. You know, we had a training since the Floyd issues. We had a training recently with the ILRC and the La Raza groups, and they were instructing us on things that were happening. And a lot of times it's not necessarily cooperation, but if ICE were to call and say, hey, are you releasing somebody? Can you slow that down a little bit? And it's hard to prove that necessarily, but at times, and you can't come into the jail, but folks have been picked up right outside of the jail. So I think, and we have to base it on what people are telling us, of course, and it's not very frequent, but there were people who mentioned that they were removed, and it's happened. I knew somebody whose client was removed for some reason from court, and I know that kind of upsets Steve's group because they're in the middle of a prosecution, but somebody was removed to immigration court in the middle, and that kind of throws an issue, and no one's really quite sure how that happened. It's only been several people, so I don't think there's a blatant cooperation. But obviously there's issues, and that still goes back to the people who are in custody. I know many people, their families say, if you're arrested, bail out quickly, because if you're Latino and you're arrested, you got to figure out how to get that person out of custody, because there is this fear that once they're there, there's going to be cooperation, and that perception is big. So that's just something I think needs to be addressed, you know, between the police departments and the communities, and that's something they can work together with.
Body cameras involve controversy because we find sometimes when major things happen, they aren't turned on. So do you think, all of you, that all officers should have body cameras? Should there be a policy such as full-time when officers are on duty? And should there be the recordings available to the public within days, if not instantly? And what are the consequences for officers who turn off their body cameras or don't even have them on?
Well, that sounds like another question for me. So we do issue body cameras to all of our personnel, both in the field and in the jail. We have some very clear policies that talk about when they must turn them on, and when they should not have them on. It is not, feasible. It is not appropriate. We see people in some of their most vulnerable stages in their lives, and having a body camera on full time is not really practical. We also have disciplined people who have not turned their body camera on when they were supposed to, and will continue to do so.
So it seems to me that that gives a lot of leeway to officers, because you just now mentioned seeing people at very difficult times in their lives. So an officer could say, well, this was a very difficult time, I thought, and therefore I didn't have it on.
Great point. So by very difficult time, I'm talking about a domestic violence situation, somebody who's been sexually assaulted. Whenever we encounter somebody in on a traffic stop, or someone who we may be taking enforcement action upon, that camera has to be on. The policy is very clear. If we encounter a homeless person, that camera should be on. But again, there are times when we're in people's homes where it would be embarrassing and perhaps inappropriate, and in that time, we don't put the body camera on.
Well, here's a concern that I think people would have. And, if you call 911, the tape runs. Their tape runs continuously. Everything that's said on 911 is taped. Now, when we make subpoenas, when we subpoena tapes, they'll cut out sections. But the whole tape is there in the event it's necessarily or it's needed. I think the cameras obviously protect both sides. Everybody wants them for the public side. But as for law enforcement, it would be ideal to have these cameras, because in a very vulnerable situation, I can't tell you how many times I know officers have gone to domestic violence situations that have resulted in people turning on the officer. And if the officer's camera wasn't on when they got there, it's word against word, and someone's going to say, they came in, they did this. So for the protection of everybody, the cameras should run. Now, as Steve would, I think, be able to attest, he knows these laws better than I do. There's certain things that for us to be able to get the recordings, you'd have to get special court orders. So if the camera runs and captures everything, you never know what would be needed. So why not have it on some database somewhere that the sheriff, the ranking officers, the district attorney, the judge would be able to say, okay, this is appropriate. Because again, if we leave it up to individual, people's, if it's not objective using it, if it's subjective, there's going to be a question as to validity, and we don't want that.
I agree completely, because even, and I'm not in law enforcement, but there are many times that domestic call ends up becoming violent, and how does the officer know, or how does the deputy know, in a split second, okay, this is going south, so I'm going to turn the camera on or not. It doesn't even, I think that just about anything with regards to members of the public coming into contact with law enforcement is going to be potentially embarrassing, whether, if when I get pulled over for driving 80, it's embarrassing. But camera should be on. I'm not going to do anything, but the officer doesn't know that. So the bottom line is I don't understand that policy. I think, like Mr. Allen said, it should be on at all times. It doesn't mean everybody's going to have access to it. It's not going to be on TV the next night for everybody to see, but at least it's there in case it is needed to validate one statement versus another about what really happened.
Any comment?
Can I dovetail onto that just really quickly?
Sure.
Carlos, you asked me a question earlier about what does it mean to reimagine what the police is, and I think there are a few words that come into my mind. I'm a corporate strategist, as you know, and we create corporate strategies by kind of identifying what particular corporate mission statements we want to put forward. And one of the things that I think that all law enforcement organizations should be really clinging to is this concept of transparency. We need to constantly be thinking about ways to make the work of police departments and policing apparati transparent, and whether that means through the releasing of different HR complaint files, and also the capturing of video in response to an interaction that a police officer has had with a member of the public. Again, that level of transparency helps to create that trust and that mutual support that I was mentioning before. You know, without that as kind of a given, the foundation of support can never be established.
Well, seems like, Michael, that might have been the final word. Under what circumstances of crowd control, Sheriff Bolanos, do you permit officers to use tear gas and rubber bullets against civilians?
Another good question. Thankfully, we don't ever have to deploy any of those tools in San Mateo County. The only time that we bring those with us is when we respond to neighboring counties who have more difficult public demonstrations. But the only time that we're allowed to use those tools are against violent groups that are demonstrating and causing violence. Never against peaceful protesters who are, perhaps not moving or blocking traffic. It would never be appropriate to use the tools in those circumstances.
Well, when you go to neighboring communities, do the officers who take that equipment make the final decision, or once you go to neighboring communities, assuming that you're collaborating with other officers there, do they make the decision when that equipment should be used?
Great question. It depends on where we go, but we never send any of our personnel outside of the county without a member of my command staff. And if we go to the city of Oakland, they have a court order that says no equipment shall be utilized without the permission of one of their command staff members.
Well, if there are no further comments, one audience member said, "I'm worried about armed extremist groups such as Proud Boys and Oath Keepers blocking polling places. Does the sheriff's office have a policy about this?"
I don't know that we have an expressed policy against them, but we will certainly ensure that everyone in San Mateo County is able to vote as they are constitutionally guaranteed without any fear or reprisal. We will certainly be on alert on election day, and I assure you that all of San Mateo County law enforcement is prepared in the event there are any issues at any of our polling locations.
Has the town license plate cameras actually helped solve any crimes in Portola Valley? Or are they only useful for feeding information to the Regional Intelligence Center?
Henrietta, if I can answer that, please. It's Captain Corpus again. We have had some success stories with the ALPR readers. We don't look at the ALPR unless we have a incident that's occurred and it has to be a serious incident. So we did have a case that I can briefly talk about, but it was there were some juveniles having a party, and another group of individuals came and robbed one of the juveniles of some of the clothing that he had on, which were expensive tennis shoes. So we were able to go back and look at the ALPR with the information that was given to us by the witnesses. And within 24 hours, we had the suspect in custody. So we don't look at the ALPR unless there is a violent crime or there is, it has to be a serious crime. And then we also provide audits. So the town will ask us for the information. They'll give us a time frame, and we'll run an audit and then provide that to the town so they can see who actually looked at those cameras and the reasoning behind it. So it's not just feeding information to the intelligence center or infusion center.
Sure. Now there is a question for you, Kevin, about the database being built. And is this available now? And if so, to whom?
Oh, wow. Sheriff, you're off the hook. They sent one to me.
Thanks, Kevin.
The database is being created within our own office, or within the private offender, but it's just part of really a larger collaboration around the country. There's people, the ACLU has a database. Recently, legislation changed where the use of force logs would have to be turned over. So I think that there's a lot of agencies that are doing this, again, to maybe track patterns. And the tracking of the patterns, I want to really suggest, is first and foremost to help agencies if they, for some reason, don't see a pattern within their own agency. This would be an outside eye looking and saying, hey, you know what, we see this, maybe it's something that can be addressed. So ours is only internal, and we would be using other databases to help supplement ours. I do want to use this real quick. I know we didn't get to this question to dovetail in. You mentioned there was a question about civilian oversight, and that's one that I know it's a hot ticket, and we can't get into it too much today. There's an overall group, NACOL, the National Association for the Civilian Oversight, and I know that obviously police aren't necessarily too happy about having those functions, but I was the director of the one in San Francisco, and what I learned was oftentimes by us looking into situations, we saw, because San Francisco had to turn over all of information, all of use of force, anything that, if there was a complaint, they had to turn over all of the investigation. And oftentimes we saw that everything was done correctly. Now, maybe the population didn't want to hear that, but we were able to, I think it added validity to the complaint process. Police are wonderful and will do their own internal investigations, but if there's no transparency, the public is going to question. They're always going to wonder. And I think, as Michael was saying earlier, we're not going to make strides unless there's some type of a trust between the organizations. And so it might be a thought, because we have all these various organizations, to have some group that works with them all in San Mateo County as a bit of oversight. And then they'd be looking at things like the cameras and the use of force and the tasers. That's my point.
We have all of about 2 minutes left, and I'd like to give each of you maybe 30 seconds to at least add anything that you'd like to add, to say something that you hadn't said or that you think needs to be said. Anyone?
I'll go ahead and start.
Sure.
I just want to thank my fellow panelists and of course you for serving as the moderator. Some very thoughtful comments that I am certainly going to ponder and look at how we as the Sheriff's Office can continue to improve. And I just want to say that again, we're very fortunate, all of us who live, work, and have family in San Mateo County, to have the dedicated, professional, and compassionate law enforcement officers who I am proud to serve with. So thank you all.
Thank you, Steve Wagstaff.
Thank you. Thank you. Henrietta, great job moderating this. Not easy to corral all 6 of us. I want to simply say that Michael used a word, transparency. I think that's as important a factor we need to get to as communication and everything else. And if we can do that, we try to do it in my office. Anybody wants to read any of my investigations regarding officers using force and killing somebody or injuring somebody, they can read everything that I read on that, because transparency is it. We need to take even greater strides in that area. But I also want to say that, I've been here in law enforcement as the deputy DA for almost 44 years. And during that time period, I've seen every sheriff along the way. I've seen all the police chiefs. I've seen nothing but what I view as strides to go the right way. Forums like this help us want to take those strides forward. And I think we're extremely fortunate to have Sheriff Bolanos as our sheriff. Thank you.
Thank you. Reverend Owens.
I again want to thank you, Ms. Burroughs, for moderating, and thank Portola Valley for having this forum, and my fellow panelists for being here. Where, you know, I think we agree in a lot of areas. I think there are some areas we disagree in. I think the one thing I do want to stress is that transparency and building of trust is something that needs to continue. I would like to invite the Sheriff's Office and the DA's office to work with us at the NAACP. That we may not have a very big population of color in San Mateo County, but there are some of us there, and work with us. And you know, again, I mentioned the relationship we have with San Mateo Police Department. We'd like to see more of that, more collaboration, more information. I heard things tonight from you guys that no one ever bothered to share with us. So I'd like to see more of that, and I thank you for coming out and sharing that information.
Thank you, Captain Corpus.
Thank you, Henrietta. It was very nice meeting you tonight. And thank you to the town of Portola Valley and my fellow panelists. And I just want you to know that, I have been with the Sheriff's Office for 18 years, and I've just seen a transformation. And so I want to thank Sheriff Bolanos for that. And I want to thank everyone's input, because I think, you know, in order for us to move forward, we all have to have these conversations and, work together towards seeing, continuous with the just being transparent and really focused on listening and hearing each other's views and working towards getting better together.
Thank you, Michael Smith.
Thank you, and thank everyone for joining this conversation tonight. It's such an important conversation, and I will say that even though sometimes it feels uncomfortable, we have to be having these conversations. That is why the town of Portola Valley, who put this program together, should be lauded for their efforts here. And I really want to say thank you about that. And the last thing I want to say is that if this is something you care about, make sure you stay engaged. Make sure you reach out to Sheriff Bolanos, DA Wagstaff, Reverend Owens, myself, Kevin Allen. We are part of this ongoing conversation. If you want to be a part of it, and if you want to bring systemic change on this issue, stay engaged, stay energized, and stay in touch.
Thank you, Kevin Allen. Just a few seconds.
Just very quickly. Hey, I would not give up Monday Night Football for many things, and I am so happy that I gave it up tonight to be here with you all. So worth it. Thank you, Henrietta. Great job. I think they should use you for the next presidential. I will say, I mentioned we dig in and we're going to fight. Our office, the lawyers are great, and they're going to fight with the DAs every step of the way, but we have some great relationships. Steve, I love the people in your office. Sheriff, some of my closest friends are some of your sheriff. We get along. Most people think I'm a cop all the time anyway, because they don't mistake me for a lawyer, implicit bias. But thank you all. Lori, Reverend Lori, it's so pleasure to meet you. I hope we can chat in the future. Captain Corpus, I'll see you. Everyone, thank you. Keep the conversation going.
Thank you. I see John and Marianne, so now it's in your hands.
Thank you so much, Henrietta. This is a great conversation. We obviously could go on for a lot longer tonight, but unfortunately, people have other things to do. So we'll wrap it up now. And first, I just want to thank the attendees that we had, somewhere around 95 people or so listening in and sending in questions. We've clearly just barely scratched the surface on these complex issues. But as all of you have said, we hope that this will spark involvement and ongoing talk about this in the public. So hopefully those folks out there who are listening will be passing it on to everyone they know and letting everyone know that I think we have a good start. And we will be putting forward more ideas from the town as we move forward. I want people in the public, in the community, to check with our town website and look for our ongoing programs that we're still in the process of developing. There are also some community organized events, such as the weekly Triangle Park demonstration that's been taking place over the last few months. So I think that we have some great ideas going forward. I know that Captain Corpus at one point noted that implicit bias training really opens people's eyes. I think that's absolutely true. We had a reading by the author of Bias last month that was fabulous, and I think a lot of people kind of got more clued into what's going on during that event. I think the discussion about transparency, Michael Smith's talking about reimagining what policing is, making policing more transparent, helping develop a climate of trust is just right on the money. And the Sheriff's Office has been talking about more open cooperation with all of your groups, with the NAACP, San Mateo chapter, the public-private defender, and the district attorney, and of course all the communities that you serve. So I'm really hopeful, and you all presented a really optimistic line of comments tonight. So let me just wrap up by saying thank you again to Henrietta for being a great moderator. I want to thank Betsy Colby, our friend from the League of Women Voters, for passing on the questions from the public. And thank our town manager, Jeremy, for his unwavering support while we put this all together. And of course, especially our engagement analyst, communications and community engagement analyst, Carrie Chin at the town, who managed to put together all the technical aspects, which are a lot more complex than most people imagine. And finally, I'll just say a huge thank you to my fellow council member, Mary Ann, who has experienced all this complexity firsthand and is, I'm sure, very relieved to have brought this to a successful conclusion. So thank you again, and good night to all.
Good night.